Hey guys, so I decided to do a review of What the Health because I just watched someone else's review and I thought it would be amiss if I don't do my own review of this movie. So What the Health is basically a documentary. It's a food documentary and it is on Netflix. So this film is basically looking at the sort of like farming and animal industry, let's say food industry, but specifically focusing on the meat and dairy and the impact it has on your bodies. So one could say, or one could argue, that this film is like one of those vegan propaganda type of documentaries, which I'm feeling like some people are feeling about the film. In my opinion, I think that it is one of those films that every single person should watch, regardless of what your food choices are, whether you're actually vegan or not vegan. I think it's just a thing that you need to watch just because it basically helps you to start thinking differently about food. So will you likely feel like, oh my god, I don't know what I can actually eat or what's safe to eat by the end of the documentary? Absolutely. You kind of feel a little bit panicked and like manic about it, you know what I mean? Which is natural every time you watch one of those documentaries. Like, I love those type of things, and I've watched dozens and dozens of food documentaries, and I can recommend the best ones if you care. But and some of them, actually I've watched some anti-vegan ones about deficiencies and orthorexia and all this type of things. I love watching documentaries around food and health. But this one, I will say, to me, it's one of the more exceptional ones, just because they're questions that I had never thought about, and maybe it was just me, that were raised about, you know, who sponsors what industry and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of sketch stuff that happens in the whole meat industry, dairy industry, food industry in general. Because even with vegan food, it's the same thing, really. Like the production of some of the stuff like soy and whatnot, like the whole thing is messy, right? So I think the interesting points that the guy was bringing out was about the studies he was referring to were showing the different connections between meat, dairy, and its impact on health and society's health. So yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and say that everyone needs to go vegan or anything like that, because, you know, that's something that if you decide to do vegan, that's your choice, but you shouldn't be like going vegan just because you watched a documentary. You should go vegan because you've researched about it and you've actually read so much about it, and talked to your doctor and whatnot, right? So yeah, so I think it's kind of like important to think about those things. My mom actually had cancer, so when it comes to food and the connection between food and health, I started thinking about it very, very strongly when my mom got sick. And if you've ever had cancer, or if you've known someone who's had cancer, then you probably have thought about food and its connection to your health. So yeah, I have a personal sort of bias to the subject. Really, I think it's one of those personal decisions that's purely based on your own research and your own medical advice and, you know, your own opinion. That said, this documentary should not be knocked because I think it's worth watching regardless of what your food diet is. Like, I'm not a healthy person by any means, but I consider myself someone who's pretty knowledgeable about food and in the food industry. But after watching that documentary, guys, I was pretty blown away at the things that I didn't know. The only criticism I have of the film is that it lacked a global perspective. By global perspective, I just mean that there's so many countries in the world and so many communities and civilizations in the world who depend on meat and dairy as a source of food. And so the film kind of focused more on the standard American diet, or SAD as it's called. My point is, there's so many factors that make the American health condition the way it is. So Americans are inactive, the way the food is produced is terrible, like in terms of like the meat industries and the way animals are raised. The whole food system in America is sort of questionable, right? Like there's a lot of like individual interests or or capitalistic interests that drive the industry, as opposed to like for the good interests for the people, or health sort of standards. So by that I mean, if you go to places like Europe, their standards are a little bit more centric on the people. So they make sure that or at least they do their best in ensuring that the way animals are raised, or the dairy industry, the way you know, antibiotics, hormones, things like that, the standards are way higher in Europe generally than they are in the US. So I think my question was really around, let's say the documentary failed to kind of acknowledge that there is something to be said about, is it just the American thing? Now I know people who are, those of you who are like super vegans and like super like conscious eaters or whatever, might say, oh yeah, like everywhere there's a real connection. And the WHO, I know, for example, classified bacon or processed meats as carcinogens, meaning they're cancer causing foods. And so yes, I know that there's an unbiased sort of fact that there's a connection between meats and cancer, or a link that's been made. Now my only thing whenever those conversations are happening is that let's also maybe have a conversation about those countries where the incidences of cancer, diabetes, heart disease are low, but yet they're eating dairy and they're eating meat, maybe not processed meat, but they're eating meats and whatnot. What does that mean? Right? So I've watched like another Netflix documentary, Forks Over Knives, which looked at, there's a famous study that looked at parts of China where people started eating meat. So, you know, modern day China, where people are now eating a lot of meat and drinking milk more, and like seeing how there's like a connection to cancer. But then again, my argument with the Chinese situation is that China is like a very polluted country, not in a bad way, but you know, that's just one of the things because of the manufacturing that goes on. So it's hard to use them as a case study of like, look here, the people who live in this part of China who eat vegetables, they don't get cancer and these ones do, because we can't separate like climate and the environment and how that impacts cancer incidences. But what we can do is look at countries where they have pretty okay climate in terms of like, they're not really dealing with like major pollution situations, but then they have good farming practices and that sort of thing. Like, let's look at those countries and then like figure out, are the incidences of cancer, heart disease, diabetes high in those countries? And I don't know if they are though, you know, like, I mean, look at the Mediterranean. I know there's like in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, there was this whole Mediterranean diet craze, and they eat animal products. Yes, they don't eat them all the time, so they eat a lot of fish and seafood and that sort of thing, more than, let's say, beef or red meats in general. But still, they're eating fish and they're still eating what do you call it, they're eating poultry and that sort of thing. So I don't know, so that's my own, I don't know whether that's a fact, right? So in terms of like, I'm not saying that there's no connection between animal products and all those diseases, but I'm just saying there's a bit of a loophole there that we don't know, or that film didn't really educate me about what life is like for, let's say, a French person who eats cheese every single day and eats, like, I don't know, they eat all types of meats there. And are they having the same rates of diabetes and heart disease and cancer as Americans are? So actually, yeah, France is a great example. If the documentary had looked at a country like France, which generally the country has pretty decent animal practices and farming practices, if they look at that country and then they look at the American diet, are they saying that even people in France have the heart disease, diabetes, and those things as much as Americans? I don't think so, guys. I don't think so. Like, because if you know, like, the French thing, there's a classic thing that people talk about, at least when I was growing up, which is like, like the French diet of like, oh, French people eat bread and they don't get fat kind of thing. And so I'm just saying that there's a bit more information that you on your own would need to go and do research. I don't have the answer to that question. I'm not gonna sit here and suggest that, oh yeah, it was total bullshit, like everything he said is a joke. It's not a joke. Like everything he said is so important, especially if you live in America, to think about. But also if you don't live in America, like you still need to think about, you know, how those things impact your health. And the only person who can change your own trajectory for some of these things is you. I mean, things like cancer, diabetes, heart disease, they're kind of induced by food, which is the craziest thing about it, right? Like, I'm not saying all cancers are, but many cancers are environmental and they're also caused by food. So it's about thinking about the products you use on your body, whether it's lotions, makeup, food you're eating. It's about thinking about it for diabetes and heart disease. It's like thinking about sugars and salts and fats and where you're getting your if you're getting saturated fats in your diet, like how that's going to impact your wellness and your well-being. This film, for what it's worth, it definitely forces you, literally forces you to really think critically about the things that you're putting in your mouth. And I'm all for movies that are about that, and so I'm not going to knock any film that tries to do that. Even if you guys, I believe you're all smart enough to kind of read through the kind of BS stuff. So there's some moments where you can just say, guy, you're being too extreme. There's no need to do that, homeboy. Like, your point is clear still. Like, the movie would still be really good without the exaggerations. But I think you're all smart enough to be able to kind of see beyond the extreme bits. And yeah, otherwise I really think you should watch it, guys. I'll end my rant here because I can go on and on talking about food and this type of stuff. But let me know if you've watched this film, you guys, because I'm curious to hear how it kind of landed on you. Yeah, I'm pretty much happy that the film happened, and I'm happy that I watched it, even though I reluctantly watched it. But I'm very happy to learn about those things, and I took it offline and I started Googling a lot of things that I saw in the film, and I've been researching a lot, and I'll talk more about what my eating plan is going to be like moving forward, because it did greatly impact the way I'm thinking about the way I'm going to be eating moving on. So I have been thinking about this whole thing for a while, and I'll talk more about it in my next video when I talk about what I'm going to be eating and that sort of thing for August. But yeah, I would love to hear what you guys think. And yeah, I would love to hear what you guys think about it. And then also I would love to hear, if you've watched it, what you thought about it. Yeah, I'll just end it there for now. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.